I'm really excited for this particular workshop. I've known Jamie for a number of years. Jamie's our local expert on everything substance use, and working with our Kairos Addiction Service and helping train frontline staff and being aware of how to identify young people that are struggling with a substance use issue. So you're in good hands with her talk here this evening. But just for those of you that may not be aware of the organization, outside of Kairos, we have 7 other programs and services, including our volunteer program, which many of you guys are a part of. But ultimately, we're always trying to find ways to help young people overcome challenges, whether it's through attaching them with positive role models, providing them with school supports, substance use supports, or just helping them make better choices in the community so that they don't find themselves down those wrong paths. And part of our mandate is to help our community better understand the choices and the directions that kids make, because oftentimes we fall into the rut that they have a choice to do a lot of the things that they do. And I'm a firm believer that they don't necessarily have that choice, because if they could do well, they would. So if they're not doing well, it's incumbent upon us and you guys and everything that we do in this community to wrap services around kids and support them. So I thank you all for being here tonight and listening to Jamie, and I will stop there and I'll hand it right back to her. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Sean. So I'll just be upfront, let everybody know, I have pretty much avoided Zoom this whole pandemic because I hate it. So when Jackie asked me to do it, I did it because I love Jackie. But in the days leading up to it, I've become so nervous. I'm used to doing this in person. So there's something, I don't know if you guys have felt it, but when the fact that you see boxes and there's a lag, you don't know if your face is freezing. So I apologize if it's all over the place, because it's just such a different way to do things. I'm
You're
also going to say, oh, thanks. Whoever said that. So I'm just going to say that because it's only an hour workshop, it's pretty much designed for people who know nothing to little to nothing about youth substance use. So sometimes if you find you're somebody who knows quite a bit and you still feel hanging in there with us for the hour, maybe you'll have some questions at the end that maybe you're interested in knowing, or maybe it's just nice to know there's like-minded people out there. Also, it was hard putting this together because a lot of the times when we do talks, we cover the trends in the community, but given that it's Zoom, we've noticed that people seem to come from all over to watch these. So I didn't want to spend a ton of time on the Kingston community, which is where I'm from, if people aren't from here, because drug use is, the trends are different from here to Baydock, there's no set trends that are the same in each city. I do talk a little bit about the trends in Ontario. So I apologize to those who aren't maybe in Ontario, but just to kind of give a little bit of knowledge for people who are more from the community and aren't aware of those trends. So, like Jackie kind of explained, I am so used to doing it in person. So if you want to I'm so used to when I present, I don't just spew out information, I kind of more ask questions. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to zero that back. So if you're fine just throwing out an answer, that would be great. If you don't want to participate, don't worry about it. You don't have to. And for the off kind of topic questions, just put those in your chat box and I'll get to those at the end. I'm trying to just talk as much as I can and then give a half an hour for questions if there seems to be a lot. Does that sound good? Great.
Sounds
Okay.
great.
So I'm pretty sure this is why substances use drugs, or why teenagers use drugs. I think that's what we called it. So I really noticed, I think adults are interesting when we interact with teenagers, because I find that, and I'm guilty of it, I have a 20-year-old daughter. We've been through adolescence together. I also have a 5-year-old. There's something about being an adult. We really expect our kids to do better than we are even able to do as an adult. And I really noticed this when it came to like, we started incorporating phones into our daily lives. You know, my daughter she got her first phone when she was in grade 8. And I'd get upset with her, like, why aren't you doing your homework? Why are you always on the phone? Why are you? And then like one day I realized I was in like a YouTube wormhole looking up, got like somebody shot somebody in 1974 for like 4 hours, realized I hadn't done all the things that I was supposed to be doing, and then realized how insane it was that the skills I expected my daughter to have that I clearly didn't have myself. And I think that's interesting. Like the same kind of thing goes for substance use, you know, like we talk about why are teenagers using substances, and we get panicked, and that's mainly because we care, right? Like we care about the kids in our lives. But they kind of use substances for the same reason that adults use substances. And a lot of people, especially when you have this kind of talk, immediately go to the illegal substances. Well, I don't use crack, I don't use meth, but 80% of the population around drinks alcohol, which can be just as detrimental to somebody's health as crack or meth. So it's interesting. So one of the things I like to get people thinking about is, why do people use substances? Anybody have any answers?
To escape.
To escape?
Mm-hmm. For example, maybe you have a crappy circumstance at home.
Yeah.
And so you use to escape.
Absolutely.
That circumstance.
Used to escape, for sure.
I'm Jay, by the way.
Hey, Jay.
I'm sitting in with Bree. I would say to cover up the insecurities that you might have about yourself.
Absolutely. For sure. Thanks,
This
Jay.
is Natalie. I would say
Hi,
to deal
Natalie.
with pain.
Yeah, to deal with pain. Physical and emotional, right?
To fit in.
To fit in. Absolutely. So in the interest of time and us being on this weird device, so this is kind of a ongoing list that I've been using for a couple of years to say like why people use substances. I find the first couple reasons, you know, obviously when we use it for things like pain or to escape, stuff like that, we need to try it first to know that that works for us. So usually the number 2 reasons why kids try substances to begin with are either peer pressure or just curiosity. You know, kids are young, they want to know what stuff, you know, some things are doing, somebody's smoking a joint, somebody's drinking, they see their parents drink, just pure curiosity of what happens, or maybe a little bit of the two. And the same with adults, like once they realize what it does for them, they, you know, people don't use, if substances didn't have benefits, we wouldn't use them. So I think one of the big mistakes that we make when talking to kids is we don't acknowledge the benefits that people get out of substances. And I think that gets in the way of trying to get people to really look at their behavior, right? Or like listen to somebody, because as soon as you're just like, it's bad, you're going to end up in an alley somewhere, addicted, lose everything. And, you know, and then they see their brother, and their brother, you know, is getting all A's. He's on the football team. He's got a lot of friends. He's not ruining his life, and he smokes pot. Or, you know, they see their parents using, or whatever, right? We know that for 100 years, we've been researching drugs, and we've been blaming the chemical hooks of substances as the reason why people end up in addiction, not because basically we don't research things that are illegal. So we've been putting rats in cages and a bottle of solution with cocaine in it. And I mean, if you're stuck in a box and all that you have to do is cocaine, probably just going to do cocaine, right? So haven't been actually studying why people actually get addicted. And what we know we're starting to see is that most people who use substances, only about 5% of that population are going to end up in pure addiction. So most people who are using substances and are able to use moderately when they use moderately, that benefit you get out of it is going to continue to happen for you. So when a kid tries something out of curiosity, realizes like, hey, I actually am able to let some of my insecurities go. I'm able to socialize a little bit better. I'm able to be myself. They get a benefit, right? They get a benefit out of it because it's probably not going to turn it off on them the first time they do it. And so if they get that benefit, they're going to continue probably to try and use it in the same way we do as adults. Do you guys think it's normal to want to like alter your state of consciousness? Is that a normal thing, or is that something that it's like, no, that's really unhealthy, we shouldn't be doing that?
I think
I
it's
wouldn't say-
normal.
Okay, we got somebody thinks feels it's normal. Somebody else was going to say something.
I was going to say that I think it's normal to have that, but it's not necessarily healthy.
Okay, it's normal to have that curiosity, but not necessarily healthy. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, or is that kind of where everybody's at? So obviously probably one of the number one ways we alter our state of consciousness is substances, which is not necessarily healthy, but there's many other ways that we do that are considered the healthy way to live, right? Mindfulness, meditation, yoga. Some people would argue that fasting is healthy for them, or it's for their religious practice, so it's very important to them. Like all these kinds of things alter our state of consciousness, and it's a lot of it's encouraged, right? Sometimes when I do this, I show a video of I don't know how old she was at the time, 18 months, I think, just spinning in a circle. And as we all have memories of it, right? Like, who didn't spin in a circle as a kid, just going round and round? And we all did that for different reasons, like to feel dizzy, to feel different, to have fun. And, you know, it seems to be like a human craving to feel different, to kind of get a break from yourself, or get sometimes people feel enlightened, like isolation tanks. Actually, I don't know if Sean's still here, and I don't know if he'd like me telling his secrets, but there's that place called Immerse out by the Invista Center, and they have the isolation tanks. It's just like this little pod filled with about, I don't know, like a foot of water, salt water, and you just like close it and you just float in there, and they play music, and it's really beneficial for some people. So what do we want to protect? Obviously, right? Like we're talking about, like, lots of people use substances. There's lots of reasons. We know that the benefits come from them. So why do we want to protect our youth from using substances? I love the quote, "Youth is wasted on the young," because I'm getting old. I'm jealous. Like all the things that I know now that I wish I knew at 16. But it's true. You know, everybody has their different reasons. A lot of people, especially like parents, caught up in the legality of substances. I know for a long time before pot was legal, even still after pot's become legal, a lot of parents that we'll work with will be really stuck on the pot that their youth is using, and then they might make a transition to downing like 5 beer a night, and the parents like, you know, it's better, and it's just like, but is that better? So it's interesting that when something is legal versus not legal, or if it's been legal for a long time or illegal, how people kind of get caught up in that. Obviously, the number one for lots of people is interfering with healthy brain development, interfering with healthy emotional and physical development, risk of accidental harm or death. Before our drug poisoning crisis, we have a drug poisoning crisis going on, and also even before that, alcohol was the number one substance that was responsible for accidental death. So that's been going on for a long time. Risk of negative effect on behaviors. Obviously, when we are under the influence of other things, it trickles into some decisions we make, and we don't always make the best ones. Risk of long-term addiction, the scary thing, while only about 5% will have an addiction from using substances, the thing about addiction is you don't know if that's going to be you until you're there. So there's no prediction in whether that will be you or not. And that's obviously a fear of our young people using substances, especially if we have it in our own family. Our own negative experiences, if we've had some negative experiences ourselves, like I have personal experience with addiction. And so when it comes to my kids, obviously I worry. And we always want to have our youth learn from our own mistakes, which never seems to work out, but that's always what we want. And number one is fear. I've really noticed it's been a long journey of getting better at working with families. And in the beginning, I was really kind of arrogant and naive when parents would act crazy. Like my daughter hadn't hit adolescence yet. And I didn't understand. I'd be like, these parents are crazy. Like, why would they act like that? Why would they treat this situation this way? And then I had my own adolescent and I realized sometimes we don't act in the best way as parents just because we're scared and we don't. I find typically when people are afraid, especially when they're in the more power position, we try to control. And I find that's obviously the thought of our young people makes us scared. So even though we don't want our kids using substances, I do find people who aren't around it in this kind of field or anything are surprised to learn how many kids are actually using substances. So this is the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey. It's done by KMH. It's a biannual survey, so they do it every 2 years. This is, they should be coming out with one this year. I don't know, I haven't actually looked into it because I don't know if COVID has kind of affected whether a 2021 will come out. So they've been doing this since 1977. And it's interesting. I don't know if you guys notice this, but I really do notice with adults, we always think like the current generation of youth are using, we always think they're using more drugs than the generation before them. And I can tell you by looking at the results, like they actually, because this actually is a huge report, and they always include like a bar graph from 1977 to now, and it will show you like the ups and downs of drug use. It can, and they'll show you like the drug trends and stuff like that. And that's really what seems to change the most, is like what is trending in what youth are using. Any thoughts, questions, surprises, or anything when looking at this, or questions about it?
I'm actually surprised there wasn't vaping on here.
It's number 3.
Oh, sorry. Did I
Electric
just?
cigarette. Yeah, I think it's because they put electric cigarettes.
Oh yeah, I got it and I see it now. I totally should have saw that. And I think if you look at energy drinks, just from my experience with being in high schools, it might be a little bit higher this year compared to previous years.
Well, I feel like that about vapes as well.
Yeah.
The other thing to note about this survey, unless I don't think it's changed, but this is given to the average. So this is given in high schools. The idea is it's supposed to be confidential, but it is not given to kids who are not at school. It's not given to kids who are incarcerated. It's not given to kids who live on reserves. It is the average high school student. And what I would say, and this is take it or leave it if you trust my opinion, I think some kids are honest and would trust that it's anonymous, but I think the more straight-laced kid you get that might be bending the rules, the more fear there might be about putting what they're actually doing on a piece of paper. So, and I'm sure they do statistics to try to like counter that. I don't know, university statistics was a long time ago and I wasn't very good at it, but I'm pretty sure there is some way to calculate like that kind of error, which I'm sure they've done. But yeah, I would think things like vapes, it's almost like I don't even know a kid that doesn't at least once in a while vape. And cannabis.
Yeah, I think that would be higher now with it being legal.
And that's what Jake and so Jake is
Mhm.
another Kairos counselor that we have, and we do a full day training. And we always talk about this, and we've always talked about, we thought the difference once it became legal would go up, and it went up a little bit. But I expected, it would be interesting to see with a couple more years of acceptance, like what the 2021 would say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think too, if you took the
It's
reserve,
interesting.
sorry, Tracy.
No, sorry, I was just saying it was very interesting. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
No,
no
no,
worries.
that's- I think too, seeing as they don't take the reserve into effect here too, that could alter that because it's a little bit different on the reserve here locally anyways, with how easy the access is, right? Like I'm in Napanee, so I've got a lot of kids that come from the reserve. So I know that's something we see a lot, and they talk about a lot, how they can all walk in as minors to any of the pot shops and buy it.
Well, and even taking away the fact that their access is easy, just the culture, right? Like it's going to be a little bit more accepted, right? Like more people are using it as a way to make a as legal as possible living, right? So more people are going to be, the attitudes of the adults are going to be a little bit more accepting. So people might feel a little bit more open to being honest about their usage, for sure. Anything.
Is this a Provintograph?
Yeah. Oh, right. This is, yeah, Ontario.
So I'm just gonna say something. I'm
Sure.
also in Kingston, and I have worked with a few of the public schools here. And I am a CDSW student, and my son is 16. And so he's gone through a few of the public schools here, and so have my nephews. And I work with a lot of the different communities here.
Mhm.
And a lot of the parents here have seen their kids with like Xanax, and a few of them have done crystal meth, and weed is a big thing here.
Mhm.
And it's not just like in the last 2 years. I mean, like public school kids, I've gotten like 2 years ago on Mother's Day, I had 7 kids like OD on
Oh, wow.
Xanax. So like
Wow.
when I make comments about they're missing things in grade 7 through 12, it's serious. Like these are drugs that are in our schools here that are not being reflected there in the public
Yeah.
schools. And
No,
it's
absolutely.
like, it's a serious crisis. Like I know 14-year-olds that are doing crystal meth and Xanax on a regular basis. It's no longer weed. And the pot is outrageous here. Police just don't enforce the 18 and under rule here anymore. They just let it go, and it's being done in public parks here. So
Mhm.
that's the problem that's going here in Kingston. It's not being enforced. And I'm not saying they need a criminal record or anything, but it is a serious crisis here. Like it's not just adults anymore. We have a serious gap in the city where kids are not being looked after properly. And
Right.
there needs to be a substance abuse here for kids so that they can get the help that they need.
So
and
we
not
do
be-
actually, Lisa, is it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Kairos, actually, we are a substance use and addiction program for youth.
Yep.
And we have a elementary school counselor. His name is Dale Blimke. So he gets referrals, and he all of his caseload is elementary kids, actually. So, and he is always running ragged. Right now, he has 14 different schools, like kids that have
Mhm.
been referred. And then the rest of us are all, each high school in Kingston has a substance use counselor.
Yep.
So we're in every high school. And so we just do the best that we can with what we
I
have.
totally 100% get that, but there needs to be a facility here. Like, now that St. Lawrence is empty, that facility needs to be moved into like a drug treatment thing.
Yeah, I
just
would
for-
love to have a drug treatment center here for
Yeah, I
you.
know. I mentioned it to Sean. I sent a message to Sean like I would totally advocate for that to happen so that our kids have something like
Yeah, for sure.
like that's just my opinion. And
Yeah,
I
no,
will
I agree
scream
with
it
you.
to the rooftops to everybody. Cause like there is so much, like just seeing this chart here provincial wise, I don't know who's putting this chart together. And I don't know who they're asking, but in Kingston alone, there's, in my opinion, it doesn't properly reflect Kingston. So I would be hard pressed to say who, like, I would like to know like where it's going, because if I would put that against Toronto, I wouldn't say that would advocate Toronto either, or even Edmonton, because that would
Well,
like
it's
those
just
are-
like a random sample done. So
Mhm.
14,142 kids were asked. That's the
Mhm.
sample size. Um,
I'm just saying, like, it doesn't reflect Kingston at all. I'd be surprised if it reflected Toronto. Like,
okay.
you know, it's just my
Yeah.
opinion. Take it with a grain of salt, because that's
Yeah,
actually
no,
what's there,
no,
right?
I
You know?
totally, yeah, it's definitely not a perfect science for sure. I'm with
Yeah.
you. I see kids all day that are
Yeah.
using a lot of
I
substances.
would just like to see the schools that it's actually, who's actually doing the questionnaire, I guess. That's what I'd like to go see, who's doing it.
Right. It's
you know?
KMH. So KMH does it. So they have a whole like report. You can look it up. I can post the link when I'm done. I can
Mhm.
find it real quick and I can post, or I can get Jackie to send it out maybe later.
Mhm.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and then you can read more about it. Okay, so
Okay.
we know, like Lisa's even said, like, yeah, and anecdotally, without statistics, people really love statistics, but in my caseload, just talking in Kingston again, drug trends change from city to city, region to region. We have a huge Xanax problem. We've found over the last couple of years, Xanax has kind of it was up for a while, and that was about 4 years ago. And all of my kids who used a ton of Xanax also used a ton of cocaine. It seemed to be like a hand-in-hand thing that was going on. Now and then we saw cocaine used for crazy amounts for a while, and now it's back to Xanax. And I actually seem to see a trend of really young kids smoking crack, which is interesting because Kingston's not typically a crack town in the past for adults. And that's the other thing, because I also work with adults. I even find the drug trends between adults and youth very different. Like there isn't a Xanax problem happening with the adults I see. However, there is a ton of benzos in when people want to do fentanyl, they're getting benzos in their fentanyl and it's making them sleep forever. And it obviously mixing the substances, which makes it a lot more dangerous, but they want to actually be doing fentanyl, right? They don't want benzos in their fentanyl. So yeah, so anecdotally we do like my caseload would be different than what this says. But again, like I mentioned, it's like the average, right? So what do we do when we, like as somebody who sees kids, it's hard to tell when somebody has an actual full-blown substance use issue, right? Like we can all think back to our own youth where we did really, really stupid things. So it's hard to kind of determine when you get a youth in your office, knowing that youth use substances. Obviously, like most adults would be like, I don't want youth using any substances. But for my job as a substance use counselor, I need to kind of figure out who's being a reckless adolescent and who is maybe going to need some long-term help with their substance use issue. So some of the things that we look at, first of all, we look at how much they're using. You know, again, people don't want kids to be using any amount, right? And so a lot of the times people will be like, my kid smokes pot, parties and stuff. And I can understand why they have a no tolerance like rule at their house. They have to do what works for them. But in terms of being a counselor, I have to look at what actually is going on. Is there, when we get to regular use, that's when patterns start emerging. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're using all the time, but maybe they're using every weekend, or maybe they're using after school all the time. Like patterns are starting to emerge. It's becoming more often, and dependence is obviously when you remove the substance, they start showing withdrawal symptoms. Another thing we look at is how addiction or how their substance use affects their life areas. So given the age group of the people we see, it's always going to affect family. It's very like, I mean, we obviously have some families who use with their kids, but for the most part, most of the kids we see, it makes some strife at home. Parents don't want their kids using substances. So that's kind of a loose one that we use for life areas. But I start to ask, like, how, like, if I start to notice, like, somebody's having some things happen, you know, they're using, whether it's like, just say they use Xanax and they're starting to get in trouble, they're not remembering, there's a lot of drama circulating in their life. I'll sometimes start to ask, like, how do your friends feel about your substance use? And if I start to notice, like, oh, you know, my friends think I'm an asshole when I drink, or my girlfriend breaks up with me, or those kinds of things, to try to get some of that information. Kids who once had, sorry, I can't see stuff because my slide. So work, school. So obviously, if you have a kid who didn't go to school or went to school before, their school starts, you know, they're starting to be absent, they're not showing up, they're leaving at lunch because they got high over lunch and can't come back to school, or they're just too high, or they just don't care. Activities used to be in soccer or gymnastics or dance, or they used to paint, and that starts to go to the wayside. Physical health, you know, kids that are overdosing or blacking out, ending up in emerge, stuff like that, or even just falling. Like, you know, sometimes you have a kid that, like, they never know what happened, they always have bruises all over their body. That's affecting their physical health, emotional well-being. I keep going back to the Xanax mainly because I find Xanax to be such a big problem. I find my regular Xanax users start getting really angry, and like have a really hard time regulating their emotions. Typically when you take a lot of substances and start using, like, going beyond moderate use, and you're using regularly, you're dependent using, emotion, like, it's really hard to regulate your emotions. People get really weepy or anxious or angry. That seems to be a pattern that happens. Financial, obviously, especially if you're a kid, you don't have any money to begin with, that's going to take a toll. Sometimes a lot of our kids start dealing because they don't have the money to support their drug habit. So legal stuff starts happening. They get busted, expelled, go through diversion, or get criminal charges. If spiritual, a lot of our kids' spiritual stuff is necessarily important. Yeah, we get the odd time gets in the way of their spiritual relationship that's important to them. So really, like, Gabor Mate is, for people who are familiar with addiction, he is kind of a guru in the field that I really like to go to. And he basically says his definition of addiction, and I'm paraphrasing, is a behavior that is affecting someone's life negatively and they continue to use. So that's basically like how it's affecting your life areas, and if people continue to do that. Again, the hard thing of being a youth substance use counselor is consequences aren't necessarily the same as when you're an adult, right? Like when you're a kid, all sorts of kids get suspended, all sorts of kids get into trouble, all sorts of kids, like that's usually the roughest time in somebody's life. So again, it's hard to decipher, like, is this a real problem or is this a phase? Whereas, you know, if Johnny drinks all the time and punches his friends out and gets arrested every time he drinks, and he loses his house and his wife and his family, like, it's pretty clear that Johnny has a drinking problem, right? So it's all about really exploring these things and asking a lot of questions, and using kind of some instincts and stuff like that. Another thing that comes into play when trying to determine if somebody could have potential to have a substance use issue in the future is something called risk and protective factors. So the more, it's kind of like ACEs, right? The more risk factors somebody kind of can add up for themselves, the more likely they are to, you know, live in poverty, drop out of school, stuff like that, and have a substance use issue. So I always like to put a little bit of a disclaimer on things because I also don't want people knowing this and then targeting kids who their lives are filled with risk factors and being like, he smokes a joint and you're like, we don't want you, you have all these risk factors. I don't want people to kind of isolate kids who have really, really struggled and accuse them, I guess, of having a drug problem when they may not. It's just good to, gather information, ask questions, but not necessarily jump the gun. But definitely genetics can play. Some people don't believe in it, some people do. In my experience, it does seem to add up that people who have people in their family that have struggled with substance use disorder, they tend to have more of an issue with it. Obviously, it doesn't mean you are going to have a substance use disorder, but we do see that a lot. Lack of support, stability, trauma is number one, like huge. People like to say, like, not everybody who experiences trauma has a substance use issue, but almost everybody who experiences a substance use issue has trauma. Family, drug use, stress, trouble fitting in. Somebody had mentioned earlier, I can't stress this enough. A lot of the times, like, kids just, they haven't found their people yet, and they just don't, they have trouble fitting in. And a lot of the times people who are the most accepting are the, kids hanging out at the smoke pit, and you kind of end up there. And then something you might not have much in common, but you share a joint, I guess now it's more vape. Kids don't really smoke cigarettes anymore. Some do, but not that vape. And that's something you now have in common. Issues in school, I can't stress this enough. Sometimes we really take this for granted because school is so important. Getting an education is so important, and we are so blessed to be able to provide that for our children. But unfortunately, we don't celebrate all the types of intelligences that there are out there. And so there are some kids that they just, like the main subjects that we put the most importance on, it's just not for them. So when you have somebody who their intelligence isn't celebrated as much or part of the mainstream curriculum, 6.5 hours a day is a long time for 13 plus years or whatever we go to school for. It's hard. It's really hard. Struggling with mental health, obviously, like a lot of people try to cope with their mental health by using substances. Poverty, being part of a marginalized population, Indigenous youth who come from, are LGBTQ plus, any sort of marginalized population typically have higher numbers of substance use issues. Drug availability is a big one. The more drugs you have available, obviously, the more likely people are to use them. And early onset of drug use is a huge one. Typically, the younger somebody is that uses substances, the more likely they are to have a substance use issue in the future. I look at this more as a kind of going hand in hand with the trauma piece and maybe lack of support, just because, if you come from a good supportive family with good role models and good people around you, good is not the right word, because just because people struggle doesn't make them not good. Just people who have more opportunity, I guess, and have the knowledge and know how to, the skills, I guess, to provide that to their children. I think kids who, they aren't likely to be doing drugs. Like when you're 12, you're still gonna maybe play. But when life's been kind of hard and not a lot of people around, you've seen a lot of crap, drugs are more interesting when you're 12. And then obviously, the protective factors are the opposite of that. When I share this with kids, so I do a prevention program for 6, 7, and 8. It's a 7-week prevention program. I go into the public schools and we talk about all things encompassing substance use, not just scare tactics. And so we talk about this. And one of the things I always like to point out is just because somebody's life is filled with risk factors, it doesn't mean all hope is lost. We can always create our own protective factors. And as adults, one of the biggest ways we can support kids is by creating protective factors for the youth that we either serve or love or whoever we know. That is the best possible way you can help the youth that you know. It's so weird just talking on Zoom. Sorry, guys.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What about generational career in like drug dealing and criminal aspect of that?
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely like what is modeled to you. You're, modeling behavior. I often say one of the best parental strategies is, as parents, I don't know if you guys do this, maybe you're better parents than I am, but I found I do a lot of talking. I think I know a lot of stuff and I want to share all my wisdom with my kids, and they don't care. And I find really I've learned with my 20-year-olds what I wish I knew when I had her, because I had her as a teenager, is that my behavior was actually the most important, the most effective parenting strategy I had, because modeling actually really makes a huge difference in a youth's life. So yeah, definitely generational drug dealing and just, the culture, right? The culture around how the family sees substances. So when we have youth who are using substances, and we're starting to notice that it's becoming an issue, it's their use is going up to regular use, independent use. It's really affecting their life areas and they're continuing to use despite that. Maybe they have a few risk factors that are going on, and we need to start bringing up strategies. So again, because the population of who could come to the Zoom, like I didn't know who to kind of point these strategies toward. So I kind of tried to do it thinking of everybody, thinking of parents, thinking of people who work with kids, people who are just interested, might know some kids, maybe you're a brother, I don't know. So trying to fit everybody in. So if it doesn't resonate with you, don't worry about it. Number one, I guess, is be clear about what your role is. We all have different roles in a youth's life. So when I meet a youth, I often tell them, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life. You have people in your life that love you, whether it be guardians, parents, they're already telling you enough of what you need to be doing. My role is to support you and educate you on what you put into your body. So I have a relationship because I work from a harm reduction model. I don't tell kids that they have to have complete abstinence. It's up to them to come up with their plan. With that said, I think some people are in a position where maybe they're a principal or vice principal, where we work in a lot of schools. That's why I'm using this as an example. And it's their job to like keep a tight ship and keep the school safe. So their role is to deliver consequences, and that's why they're there. That's what their job's about. So they don't have the opportunity to kind of come from the same place that I come from because their job is different. So what I say is a good strategy in keeping that relationship positive is just being clear. Like if you have a kid that you have a relationship with, be clear right from the beginning where you stand. I don't know if anybody's ever used this strategy. If you have kids, again, strategy of kind of like, hey, just tell me, I won't get you in trouble. That's a terrible idea. It might work for that one situation. It's never going to work again. Kids need to know that they're in a safe place. So if your role is about having to enforce the order, like they need to know that before they open up to you about what's going on with them, if we want to get them genuine help. And if you are worried about a youth and that is your role, then you find someone that can support them and offer a safe space for them to be open. Again, be upfront and honest, kind of what your role is. Being yourself is really important. I know sometimes teenagers kind of intimidate people because they're really honest. They're pretty upfront about when they don't like you. I find kids just don't like people who can't be themselves. Like I said, I grew up in care, and my social worker was this woman named Darby, and she was gruff, and she has a like a gruff tone. She sounds like, she was one of those people that she used to smoke a lot, and she smoked like 3 packs a day, and crazy hair, and we all loved her. Everybody loved her. Everybody, it didn't matter who she was. She didn't put on airs for anybody. What you saw was what you got. And people loved her. And people just want authenticity when they make a relationship with you. Confidentiality is important. If you are in a kind of a work setting and you have to abide by the rules of confidentiality, it's, in my opinion, best to, if you ever have to breach that, to be upfront. Don't go behind their back because you're worried they're going to be mad at you, and pretend you weren't the one who made a phone call or had to tell somebody something. It's best to always be upfront. So I always tell my kids, if I have to ever breach that because they've hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, or going to, I always let them know that I'll be upfront with them. If I ever have to make a phone call, I would explain why. And if for some reason it was a safety situation that I didn't get the opportunity to talk to them first, I would definitely talk to them later about it. Again, don't deceive kids to get information. I mean, you could do it once, but that's, if you care about the actual relationship you have with the youth, that's not a good idea.
Can I just say something to confidentiality too? I think, like, my experience with working with youth is a lot of them don't fully understand what's confidentiality and what's not. So one of the big things that I've kind of gone to is when I first meet with them, I'll explain what it is, what the things are that I need to report, and what the things are that get to stay between us, so that they really do have a good understanding of what that looks like. Because I think for different places and different agencies within their lives, it looks different, right?
Yeah.
So they just get so confused about what's what with who, and nobody really explains it to them anymore. So I've found that to be the best resource. And then I've also started giving the kids the option to make those calls with me there to support them. If there's calls that we need to make, has been another really good one that I found has helped keep that relationship when I have had to make those tough calls.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like, I think if you can actually, if you have to make a tough call and you can kind of do something where you do it together and you are able to support them, that's the probably best case scenario for sure. And yeah, I'm a big believer is, not even kids, just people, humans. We forget stuff. We don't understand things. It's good to be upfront. If I have a kid that's kind of bordering on a story, because in my job, it's never my job. My job is to support kids. So they're bordering into a story that I'm like, this might be something I'll have to tell somebody. I'll just be like, I don't know where this is going, but remember that sometimes I have to call people. So, and they'll be like, oh, and they'll decide like, do I want to keep going or do I? No, it's actually not as big of a deal as it's going to appear to be.
Yeah.
So another thing, again, I think this is a huge thing. And sometimes people are like, but that's so simple. Like, we already know that. But again, I'm an adult who works with kids, and I know that I get caught up in my feelings and my fear and whatever. And it's always a good reminder. Ask thoughtful questions and listen without judgment. We always want to school kids. We always want to, when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. Like, they don't care. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you have teachable moments that you can hold on to, but they're very few and far between. I find you get the furthest with, first of all, like, again, going back to why kids use substances, the first tool that will help you kind of see where you have to navigate where your plan is going to go with them is finding out what the drugs do for them, right? We are always so quick to be like, it's bad for you. It's going to do this. you could die. You're going to get cancer, whatever. But it's really important. Like, what does it do for you? You might get things like anxiety, makes me feel, earlier today, I was talking to a kid and she's like, I always feel uncomfortable. And I always want to isolate. And the only time I don't feel uncomfortable is when I drink. And the only time I feel motivated to be around other people is when I drink. So, okay, so now you have that information. Now you can see like, how do we create that without the substance? And that is like one of the biggest helpful tools you have. Again, listening is very important. Silence is a beautiful tool as well. You know, people don't like silence. So if you're having sometimes like have a tough time getting a conversation going, just don't talk, because people don't like to sit in quiet. So they'll eventually say something. Also keeping in mind, when we are scared for the kids we love and care for, fear can a lot of the times come across as judgment, and nothing shuts a kid down as when they feel like they're being judged for their behavior. Safety first, always
Excuse me,
important.
Jamie.
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation and you're feeling fearful, like, to me, I would want to say to my son, that's why I'm here, because I want to, be, I don't know if he's using at this point in time, but he's at an age where he could begin to do that. Do you think it's helpful to say, I'm really afraid right now, or something like that, or I don't know.
Absolutely. I think
yeah,
it's
okay.
always as vulnerable, like if Brene Brown has taught us anything, vulnerability is like the key to success in relationships.
Mhm.
Like being vulnerable and owning your truth of how you're feeling is obviously, that's like how you connect with others, but
Okay.
just being aware of it, right? So it's one thing to be like, just so you know, I'm feeling really afraid right now for you. Like you're kind of mixed up in this stuff, and sometimes and sometimes consequences happen, and
Okay.
but again, but when he's speaking his truth,
Mhm.
not continuing about like, well, I'm scared, you've spoke your truth,
Yeah.
now it's
Yeah.
time to listen, right?
Yeah.
Just like we
Okay.
always have to
Thank
be
you.
on top of ourselves, because we're just humans, right? Like, or react first, think about it later. Like, I've been doing this for a long time, and even I say this all the time, not even with my own kids, but kids that I develop relationships with. It's sometimes I find myself going from counselor to like blah blah blah, and I'm just like, that's not my role, because these kids, I get to really know them, right? So I always have to like check myself, like how did I handle that conversation? Did I do okay? And how do I follow up with it later, right? Because that one, we can only do our best in every situation. So the next time we can come back, okay, I'm going to try it different this time, and put this out there, and I'm going to keep quiet. Safety
thank you.
first. Yeah, no worries. Safety first. This is a hard one, especially in different roles. Harm reduction strategies. People have a hard time with teaching youth harm reduction strategies, because it's that whole like condom pregnancy dilemma that we used to have, right? Like, are we condoning drug use if we teach kids how to use drugs safely? I think the more equipped you are with education, the better you are. The more information you have, just the better you can respond to situations, in my opinion. In my prevention program for grade 6, 7, and 8, we cover harm reduction, and we talk about harm reduction strategies. Harm reduction strategies, though, can be as simple as calling a cab when somebody drinks alcohol, right? Like getting a designated driver. So just going through, making sure kids know what harm reduction strategies are, even if it's not for them, even if it's for their friends. So naloxone kits. So we're a naloxone distribution site. So even if I have a kid, they just, they smoke a little pot, but I know that they go to parties, I'll get them to have a naloxone kit, depending on if they feel comfortable with it, right? So making sure that kids are knowing, like, people shouldn't be using by themselves, people shouldn't be mixing their substances, people should always have a plan, have a safe ride home, buddy system, like all of that stuff, right? Have a naloxone kit if you are going to parties, because kids are using pressed pills, kids are using cocaine, just because they're not using fentanyl are necessarily opioids doesn't mean that they're not at a risk of a fentanyl overdose. Meeting youth where they're at. This is more for like people who work with youth. Definitely making care accessible is number one. I feel so blessed to work for Youth Diversion because we don't have any rules on terms of how to give care. So if I have a kid that gets expelled from school, takes off from his family, nobody, you know, the police want him, I can still meet him at a Tim Hortons or, you know, pick him up at meet him in a parking lot or whatever. Making sure, because some of those kids fall off the radar if they don't have accessible care. And when kids fall off the radar, that's when bad things happen. Providing a safe space for kids to be themselves, be realistic with your expectations. Again, this goes back to for some reason as adults, we expect kids to have more efficient skills than we have. We're all guilty of it. I am. So really check your expectations. The other thing I like to bring up is I do find with kids we work with, sometimes we have higher expectations from them than we do with our own kids. So, you know, I've been guilty. I've heard people say like, you know, kid, mom doesn't have the skills. She's kind of in like a mental health crisis. Single parent, they don't have a lot of money. There's not a lot of resources. There's no food in the house. And somebody will be like, no, kid didn't show up to their appointment. It's up to them. But like, we'll have our own kids that is like, won't wake up for school and we'll set that alarm. And if they miss the bus, we'll drive them and we'll do all these things. So it's kind of remembering like these other kids, just because they're not our kids, doesn't mean they have the skills to, you know, be 14 and make sure they wake themselves up and get on a bus because they need to see a therapist. You know, it's really important to be realistic. Try not to focus on try not to focus on what isn't important. I like to, for people who have seen this is the example I always use. If people have heard me talk before, you're probably like, you have no new tricks. The same stories every time. The Criminal Minds movie, if some of you remember the 90s, where the kid wants to tell somebody that somebody's about to get shot. And he runs to the office. He's got to tell somebody, he's got to save the day. And the administrator is like, you go back and you walk here. Again, as adults, we get caught up on stuff like, you know, running in the hallways or use of the F word or whatever. And sometimes it's just not the time. You know, sometimes we got to let that stuff go. Refraining from continuing the cycle of guilt and shame. The biggest catalyst in substance use disorder is guilt and shame. You want somebody to pick up again, you make them feel guilty and shameful about their behavior. And as people who struggle with substance use disorders, nobody feels already guilty, like nobody puts more guilt and shame on them than themselves. So that's the gasoline on the fire. And that usually comes from judgment and stuff like that. Acknowledging that their experience is real. I find this is big, especially for like my higher risk clients that may be experiencing psychosis. It's one thing I really learned one day is I remember being at Street Health and a woman started talking to me, and it was all obviously not true. It was about, you know, the FBI following her and thousands of dollars always getting stolen from her account. And I found myself wanting to turn away because I knew everything she said wasn't true because she was in psychosis. And I caught myself and I thought, holy Lord, what a lonely existence it must be for somebody who is in psychosis, because nobody gives you the time of day. Nobody sits down and really listens to you in the way that we listen to each other. So I really like slapped my hand for that and was like, going forward, if, you know, I'm going to sit down, like, this is what's going on. And, you know, I want them to feel validated. I want them to feel heard. They deserve it as much as the rest of us. Like, so just, you know, kind of giving people that validation. Seeking alternative consequences. And when I say there's a reason I put it in quotes, because they're not really consequences. So instead of focusing on like taking the phone away, locking your kid down, some people take their kids' doors, some people take their kids' paychecks. Not to say don't use consequences. Again, I always say a family has to do what works best for them, but kind of get creative, kind of be like, okay, so, you know, John is struggling. So again, we're planning more family board game nights. We are gonna go. I know COVID sucks, but like when we can, we're gonna make more family trips, or like, and it doesn't have to be extravagant. You know, taking Disney World. Like, we're gonna go see some family. We're gonna go stay. We're gonna go spend some more time. And having more interactions where I learned this from SFPY. It was like a parenting group that we facilitated for a while. Just spending some like quality time with your teenager, like working on a task and telling yourself like, I'm going to make brownies with John. I'm not going to correct anything he does. I'm just going to let him do it, because we're always correcting our kids, right? It had a word for it. I can't remember what it was. Again, with schools, it'd be great in schools, or like group home settings, or whatever people might work in, if you can have an in-school suspension versus a home suspension, like really focusing on making that connection, because we know that again, another way to really fuel the fire with substance use, struggles with substance use, is like having a person feel isolated, right? So trying to come up with strategies that aren't consequences, but they're more opportunities to connect. And again, allowing them the opportunity to test the limits. So you can, if you want to, ground your kid for the rest of their life, but then they don't get to practice their behavior. And you're cutting off learning opportunities, good conversations, finding out more information on how you could help them. Unfortunately, we're able to help kids more when they are given the opportunity to go out in the world and make some mistakes. That's just how we learn. Again, if somebody's really high, it's not probably the good time. I mean, you can try to have a meaningful conversations, but the amount of times I've convinced kids that they need to go to treatment when they're really high, and then the next time they're like, I don't even remember seeing you. Yeah. And keep in mind that they remember things differently than you do, especially if they've been under the influence. It's not a battle you need to win. Let them have it however they remember the interaction. Again, back with the expectations of kids, it's not a big deal to write down resources or reminders, even though they're old enough to do it. If you want them to get help and you know they need to get help, it isn't the time to be like, well, you need to be 15 and write it down yourself if you really want help. Lots of them aren't at a stage where they actually want help. We want to help them. So if writing something down will get them to an appointment, definitely do it. And refer. Sometimes we feel like we are everything to the people we either love or that we work with, and we just do a disservice to the kids that we work with. If you aren't an expert in what you're supposed to be working on, so I'm a substance use counselor. I can help kids who struggle with a little bit of anxiety, but if they have a debilitating anxiety disorder, it's time for me to refer that on to somebody who is an expert in anxiety and how to help them with strategies with that. Or, kids can talk to me a little bit about their trauma if they want to, but if they want to work on their trauma, I need to refer them to a person who specializes in therapeutic trauma work. So it's always the more people you can add. It's cliche to say, it takes a village. So yeah, always the more people you can add to a kid's life, the better. That's kind of all I have. Again, it's super basic. I apologize if anybody came hoping for something more. If you want, Oh, gosh, there's a lot of questions. Oh, how much, Jackie, are you still here? Are you sleeping? She's sleeping.
We've got till 7:30, so you're good.
Okay, so do we have time for questions? Oh, maybe there's not. Hard to hear you. Oh, sorry, that was a long time ago. Hopefully you get to hear better in the end.
Oh, yeah, the hearing got better.
Okay, good.
Can I just share something while you're reading through the stuff there, Jamie? Or-
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
When I was in grade 6, which I'm dating myself, was a long time ago, in Kingston, they trialed a program called Values, Influences, and Peers, VIPs.
VIP, I
and it-
failed VIP.
Did you? Okay, so you took it too.
Yeah.
And I don't know whatever happened to it, but I think it was kind of a neat thing that they tried to do to kind of start introducing kids to different things, different strategies, and talk about it. It was run by the police department, and it's called the DARE program now, apparently. Okay. Anyway, I just wondered if anyone was aware of it and if they knew what had happened to it. I know that we were the trial group, and I don't know, is it prevented anybody from using or anything, but I mean, I think it introduced ideas to people. So, and maybe shared like resources and stuff like that and stuff. So yeah, cool. That's all I wanted to say.
No. So what is it? It's called the DARE program now?
Yeah, that's what one lady was saying as I was talking. She said it was called the DARE program now. So yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
So
Yeah,
I
that's
went through this myself because it was a very important program. I
Mhm.
small town and then got transferred to Toronto.
Mm.
I did it. I'm halfway through grade 7. And to answer your question, did it prevent me from doing drugs? Nope.
No,
but,
I tried them.
but
I
it
don't use them
informed
now, but I
me
tried
about
them.
the
Yeah.
drugs
Yeah,
before I did them.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
Agreed.
yeah, very much educated me. But it's so OPP does it, and it's only certain
don't know.
detachments that do it. The Kingston detachment, like the Veronica and Lennon, does not do it because I recently just looked this up.
Mm. I don't know who did it. Like I say, I was in grade 6, so.
Yeah, I totally get it. I did it in grade 7, and I'm
Mhm.
39 now, so like.
Yeah,
that'll
I'm older than that, so.
But the closest attachment that does it is Camelford.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the detachment that does it. But and it's like it's all about funding. So
Mm,
that's
sure.
why you don't see it very often, and it is on their website. I looked it up because I think we should have it here in Kingston.
Yeah, well, we used to.
Very much have it for
And it
you.
might have been run by the Kingston Police back then. Like I say, I'm almost 50, so it was a number of
I
years
think it
ago.
was run by the King because I took it in grade 6.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Kingston though, it was province wide by all police departments, because I
Oh,
lived in
okay.
Rockville at the time and
Okay.
when we had it, but it scared me. I actually still remember the officer. Her name was Sandra Barr. I still
Mm.
remember her from grade 6. It scared me. I've like actually never tried any drugs because I'm like, nope. But she brought in the fear tactics worked for me.
Yeah.
Not my brothers, but me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she brought in, like, I remember bringing in all the different pills and
Yeah.
everything, and they like showed us what was real, what was like fake at the time, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they even covered like stealing and different things like that. Like they actually staged somebody stealing our coats in the middle of winter, and so that we got the idea of like how that felt. And it was an interesting program. So yeah.
We had students who walked around white, like they were literally painted their faces white and had dressed all in white in the morning. We got there, and on the announcements, they said how they had passed away the night before of a car accident. One was for drinking and driving, another one was for overdosing. Like, and
Oh,
these
wow.
people couldn't talk, but they walked and they were in our classes as if like they were here, but now they're gone, like type style thing. And like,
Wow.
crazy stuff. Yeah.
Crazy. So the prevention program that I do that 7 weeks is the exact opposite. I try to steer away from scare tactics.
Yeah. It was all fear tactics a long time
Yeah,
ago.
but it does work. Actually, it's funny. I had a kid, I was at Molly Brandt, and the student that was in the class there, she came up to me and she's like, I know Dave. So we have one of our counselors' name is Dave. And it was like from back, like Dave's been with us for like with Kairos for a really long time. And she was like, he showed me this video and it was scary and I never touched anything. And I was like, oh, so sometimes it does work, I guess, for some people.
So where would we find out about your prevention program, Jamie? And
So
can anyone take it, or is it just for kids, or like how does that work?
the prevention program is through the school board. So I do it in in classrooms.
Oh, cool.
Right now, because of COVID, I've only like, we're doing one in Cloyne right now.
Mhm.
And it's just been harder to set up. I usually offer about 3 at a time. I don't know when it will come again, and I can find this out maybe and get Sean to let you guys know. But we do have the full day training for it's typically for frontline workers or school board staff, but if somebody had an interest, Sean, like it's free, Sean would let them come. But again, we haven't done it since COVID started.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to, we had the school board, the Algonquin board wanted to film me doing it. I'm trying to avoid that. So just hoping it stays off people's radar till all this crazy world is over. So yeah.
Well, you did great tonight, so thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
And you'd
and
be fine on video.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Tracy.
So don't be fearful. Don't be fearful. Just do it and help people.
Thank
'Cause
you.
I'd love to take the program just to have the information. So
Okay, nice. Well, definitely, I have your name, so we'll have your email. So if we do offer it any day, one day again, yeah, definitely you can come if you'd like.
Amy,
Yeah.
I just wanted to like, you did a really good job. And like,
Mhm.
I started using and drinking when I was 13 years old, and I did that for 15 years. And like,
Yeah.
I'm in long-term recovery now, but like a lot of
That's
what you
awesome.
said just felt like you were talking about me in those younger years. So like, you nailed it.
Oh, thanks. Oh, you guys are too much. I almost, thank you. Thanks, guys. I was really anxious for this. I'm just like, I was like, Jackie, what if they write in the chats like, you suck? She was like, nobody's gonna do that. And I was like, you never know. So I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. I'm glad you guys got something out of it, especially because it's only an hour and I knew, it was sent out to a lot of agencies. And like for you, you're in long-term recovery. I'm sure I didn't surprise you with anything that you didn't already know.
No.
So, I worry about people, and there's a few names I recognize that I know that they work in the field. They're really good at what they do. I know they know all this stuff. So I worried about people being like, what a waste of my time. So
No, not at
I
all.
appreciate it.
I'd,
Thank you.
I'd like to hop on the train here too, if I can, Jamie. I've done a couple of your trainings in person, and this was on par with those. Like it's been fantastic. I appreciate you kind of going past that discomfort and making this all available to us. So I mean, with everyone that's saying it, like this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, you guys are too much. Stop. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Does anybody have any questions? Enough about me. What about you guys?
She's on top of the world now. She's ready for it.
I just have that one that I sent you in the.
Oh, okay. I tried to look through them, but I was like, not very good at it. Do you remember what it is? Can you just ask me? Oh, you muted. Lisa? You're mute. You're muted. Maybe we've lost her. Lisa? Well, we've lost one. Anybody else have any questions?
She said, I'm here in the chat. The button is not working.
Oh, the button's not working. Oh, sorry. Okay.
So are we, or do
Oh,
we
I guess
have
I can
another
talk.
question?
You can hear me. Do you mind writing your question again, Lisa? I apologize for getting to do that. Oh, I asked. No, I know that you did ask, but it's in the entire chat and I don't know if I'll be able to find it. What was the question?
Is it possible for you to go through them later and answer like via email or something?
Oh, she's
Yeah,
putting it on
maybe.
here, it's here now.
Oh, can you help kids with burns from crystal meth use as they will not go to the hospital afraid of getting labeled for life? Like, do you mean from smoking it? If it is from smoking it, I don't know. I'm assuming that's what you're asking. I haven't really had a lot of kids experience that, but I know that like when we use give safe supplies, like we always encourage people to use like a tubing piece to put on their pipe. I can't help them. I'm not like my first aid is not great. I could try to talk to a kid to see if I could convince them, but in terms of providing first aid for their burns, I wouldn't, I would, I guess, recommend, I don't even know if, I don't trust my first aid. Yeah, I don't know what to recommend for that, to be honest. I haven't encountered that a lot. And I'm very lucky in my other job, we always have a paramedic on board. So any of these kinds of problems, I just direct them to the paramedic.
So I think she said, I believe it's pipe burns. I have first aid. So I would assume, like most first aid, if it's pipe burns, they refuse to go, you can give them the burn ointments and stuff like that. That would be normal first aid, no?
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily, for me, I would rather get somebody else to.
Yeah.
Who's more, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would probably. Yeah.
I think it depends on your comfort level and your level of first aid and all of those different things, right?
And my relationship with the kid and.
Yeah.
We have
How
time
bad
for
it
one more
is.
question before we end it off to this evening, everyone. One more question, last question for Jamie.
No more questions.
Okay, all right. So at this time, I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening and joining us. I'd like to say a special thanks to Cheyenne, who's in the back helping us with all of our technology. And a big shout out to Jamie for sharing her knowledge. It was quite informal. I've heard you in person and now I'm hearing you on Zoom, and you do a wonderful job. And for that,
Thanks, friend.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jamie and Cheyenne, for helping, for being here tonight and helping us, giving us, sharing your knowledge.